Okay, so as with any question, you can either read the text or infer from the code what you're asked to do. So I'm sure you guys read it, so let's quickly just see the code. So we see that we're dealing with time and we're dealing with appointments. Okay, so that kind of gives us context for this question. And we see that we have method overlap with, we have a get time. I'm not gonna think too much about those. I'm just gonna remember their names. And then conflict with, that's where I'm gonna focus on because it says to be implemented. Okay, so I'll quickly read. Returns true if the time interval of this appointment overlaps with the time interval of others. Okay, and then I see the keyword overlaps. Why is that a keyword? Because I remembered in my mind that there's another function overlaps. Okay, so I know I may be able to use it. Yeah, and then if it overlaps, we return true. If not, we're returning false. Okay, so already before even I read the question, just by looking at the code, I kind of know what's going on. Okay, so now I actually look at the question. I could read into it, and really it's kind of saying the same thing it says in the comments. So we write the method if the time interval of the current appointment overlaps with another one, we return true, otherwise false. Okay, so it really is a matter of just utilizing the code we already got. So again, let's scroll back up. We see that each appointment, right? Each appointment, we can get its time. That's one thing we see. The second thing that we see is that for each time interval, right? So the time doesn't return like a numerical number, it returns a time interval. So for each time interval, we can use this overlaps function. Okay, so in other words, all the work is done for us. We just kind of need to combine it together. Okay, so notice that overlaps also returns a Boolean value. So true if it overlaps, false if it doesn't. And really, that's what we need to do for the conflicts. True if it conflicts, false if it doesn't. Okay, so I'm going to start off. Just with the method header. Okay, so this method header should never conflict with what's given to, right? The conflicts with appointment. Cool. And we'll put our bracket. And now we actually write the code. So we'll start by using, let's actually start backwards, even though this is wouldn't be how you would do it on the exam. Let's start by doing overlaps with, because ultimately we know that overlaps with, is going to be our true or false value. So we're going to return it. Now the question is, how do we get that function to work? Well, we need two things. First of all, remember, because it's non-static, I'm going to scroll up. We don't see the word static. So we need to use it with an object type time travel. Okay, so it needs to be like object.method. It needs to be a time interval object, right? How do we get a time interval object? We use the get time. Okay, so we can do this dot get time. This dot get time dot overlap with. So this line here would get us that first time interval that we're trying to compare with the other time. Okay, and then we need an input. So we see we need another time interval here, and we're really, if we look at the function we're actually writing, we accept the second appointment. Okay, so what we need is that other appointment dot get time to get the other dot get time. Okay, now what you need to remember is that this appointment class, okay, I could have a main method in any file I want, which would, I could do like appointment, let's call it A equals new appointment, and then there's some sort of input, right? So we're gonna create a new appointment each time. They don't show us the constructor, we don't know how it actually looks like. We gotta infer that A has a time interval as part of it because we are getting the time, okay? And later on, we'd be able to do something like A dot conflicts with, right? To see if it conflicts with another one, let's say B, okay? Why is that important to remember? Because essentially conflicts with is within this appointment, and we gotta infer from the header from here that each new appointment will have a time interval attached to it, okay? Now, another thing I want you guys to notice, which may be confusing, is that we don't necessarily need the word this, okay? I wrote this to make it clear to you guys that we are, whatever function, let's say, again, we go back, we have the A dot conflicts with, this is what we write in another file, right? We're getting the time of A by doing this, right? And if I have here B, B would be other, and then B dot get time. So it makes more sense to look at it like this, but because this code will be running within the scope of A, the computer already knows that if we just put get time with no keyword this, we are still referring to A, okay? So either way works, but I want to make sure, wanted to go over that to make sure you guys remember. That's really all it is for part A. Do you guys have questions? Yeah.
Well, if there's a lot of like point, how does it know like which to compare?
Well, we only get one input, one appointment input, and we're only asked, or for part A, we're only asked to compare between whatever appointment we get and the one we are in the scope of.
What's in the scope?
So again, if I had like an appointment A equals new appointment, this is another main method somewhere, and there's some sort of input here, right? I don't know what it is, so I'm just gonna write input, right? And then let's say I had another one, appointment B, okay? If I do A dot conflicts with B, okay, I only care about checking if B, which will be other, conflicts with A, okay? And this function runs in the scope, within the scope of whatever object this method gets called on, okay? So we only care about the two we're comparing with. We don't care about any other ones. Make sense? Any other questions?
You know, switch the like get time and the get time like the other way around. That's the same thing.
So you do
Like
other dot get time dot overlaps with get time. I believe you can, yeah. It would still be the same logic. Okay. So there's no further questions. We'll go to part B. So part B is an important question, just because of how you're supposed to solve it. So if we look at part B, we're gonna do the same thing. So I'm gonna see daily schedule. There's an area list of appointment list. I think they made a little mistake here, or this may be, this is 2006, so this may be a old version of Java, but from what you know, if we want to create an area list of appointments, it would look like this. Area list appointments. right? Appointment list. Right. So here they just don't define what type is in the array list. Just watch out for that. But hopefully you realize that. So anyways, we have a daily schedule. There's an array list of appointments. Okay. And we can see really when we create. So this is a constructor. If you don't remember, there's no return type. That's how we know. When we create a daily schedule, there is a new array list of appointments created. And down here, we see we can add appointments, which is in part C. So we're not really going to look at it yet. And then also we can clear conflicts. That's what we're going to do. Okay. So conceptually, there's going to be some sort of list eventually. It could be appointment from 1 to 2, an appointment from 3 to 4, an appointment from 4:30 to 6, right? That's your daily schedule. Okay. So to be implemented in part B, clear conflicts, let's actually read through it. So it removes all appointments that overlap the given appointment. Okay. All appointment, the post conditions, remember post condition with regards to specifications. So whatever we have on top of the function, we call that the specifications of the function. Okay. The post condition is what we promise the user that will happen. Okay, so the post condition is that all appointments that have a time conflict with department have been removed from daily schedule, right? So let's say my appointment APPT. Let's say APPT is maybe an appointment from 3:30 to 5. Okay, so if I call clear conflicts with 3:30 to 5, my list would then look like just 1, 2, and then that's it. Okay, because this appointment is in conflict with this appointment and this appointment. So it conflicts two appointments, but nowhere in here does it say that we are adding this appointment. Okay, so just from reading the precondition, post-condition, that's what I can understand. When I read the actual question, it says it in words kind of what to do. What I do notice here is that they asked me to use the conflicts with from part A to help solve this. Okay, now the reason this is an important question is because when we deal with array lists and we're adding or removing, so there's going to need to be a couple things going on here. First of all, we're going to need to search one by one, obviously. And then we're comparing that one by one with the APPT, right? Then we might be removing stuff, okay? So if I write a while loop that kind of looks like while I is smaller than, what was it called? What was the, the list, APPT list, okay? While APPT list dot size, while, right? If I do something like that, and then within here, sorry, if I do a for loop, let's make it more understandable. I initialize I, and I do I plus plus. Well, if I remove something, and at the end of the for loop, I still increment by 1, right? I'm going to be missing a time interval.
Like -1.
Exactly. So it's very important that if we're searching through an array list and we're changing through it, the logic is very important. Okay, so just to reiterate what would happen here, if I'm going through this list, right, I'd be saying, okay, 1 to 2 is good. I'd be moving on to the next one. Now, when I is 1, I'd find a conflict. Okay, I would remove this, and I'd be left with the list that looks like this. Right? Next iteration, I is going to be 2, but there is no second index anymore. right? Which is a problem. So if I remove, I have to make sure that I gets decremented by 1. Okay? With that said, there is a safer way to do it that's a bit smarter than, adding 1 and then subtracting 1. Because at the end of the day, that's what if I still use this for loop and I subtract 1, it's like I'm doing the same operation twice instead of just not doing that operation.
But you only plus 1 if you add.
So
it's not like
that's definitely possible. So we can do like if we're removing, don't plus 1. If we're not removing, plus 1, right? There is still a more elegant way, and let's write it out. So first of all, we're gonna just write the method header. So public void clear conflicts accepts appointment. Okay. So what I'm actually gonna do is start from the end. Okay. So if I do for int I equals apt list dot size minus 1, right? Because the size gives us the size. So here would be 3, but I want to start at 2. So I start there, and then I say as long as I is bigger or equal to 0, I continue, and I decrement 1 each time. Now what will happen here is that I don't need any complicated plus minus. Okay, okay, because what will happen is that, let's go up here, if I start at the end, right, I is 2, okay, and I find that this needs to be removed, I remove it, next time I is 1. I don't need to do any fancy logic, right? I don't need to be aware of my I. So I is 1, and then I see that that one needs to be removed, I remove it 2, and so on. Okay, so when we're dealing with array lists that we will be removing stuff from, this is a good method. Start at the end and decrement by 1. Then for the actual logic, we're going to be using the conflicts with from above, right? So conflicts, the one we did in part A. Okay, that's because it's going to be apt list dot get I. Okay, and if that's true, well, that's true, we're doing apt list dot remove. Okay, and again, we went over this a couple times, just again reminding you, in the if statement, I don't need to do if this equals true, right? I could be, it's like whatever's in the bracket, if it's true, it's gonna do the code, right? The whole statement that we're seeing up here is already returning true or false, so I don't need to ask again if it's true or false. Okay, questions? Okay, so yeah.
I switched like the AVT list dot get I with like AP.
Yeah, so that's a similar question to what Jackie asked previously. That's fine, right? We're just comparing right to left, so it's okay. All right. There are methods, and we'll see that later in this exam, that it is important to know which side is what. Here, it doesn't really matter because we're just checking quality and nothing else. Okay. So, part C, is that fine? Move on. Okay, part C. So, let's see. Part C, well, we already saw before that we have to implement the add apartment. And again, we could read the specifications. I like doing that. If you guys, we're not thinking just about the exam and we're thinking about just becoming good software, programmers, not software engineers, specifications is where it's at. That's where you're going to be getting your real information. And when you're actually coding, there's not going to be a nice question laid out. Okay. So I like to read the specifications. Part C. Since it's saying we're getting an apartment, we're getting an emergency, we can assume that we're actually adding an apartment here, right? Saying if emergency and true clears any overlapping appointments and adds that appointment to daily schedule. Already in our minds, we should say, okay, clears. We just built something that clears. Okay, so we should clear and remove. Otherwise, if there are no conflicting appointments, add appointment to the schedule. Returns true if the appointment was added. Okay, so obviously in the exam you'd read the question too, but we're just going to skip over that. So I'm going to start off with the method header, Boolean add appointment, and then we're getting appointment apt and a Boolean emergence. Right there, yeah. Okay, so first of all, we're saying if emergency. Okay, we're taking it step by step. So we're kind of gonna just this little text turn into code. So the first thing they're saying, if emergency is true, well, what do? Clear any overlapping appointments and add to the daily schedule. Okay, so we're just gonna clear conflicts with the appointment. Okay, and again, I could do this dot clear conflicts, right? I don't have to. And then I'm going to do after that, it clears any overlapping appointments and adds appointment to the daily schedule. So I'm going to do app list dot add. Okay. Very important though, at the end, we should have read. Okay. Returns true if an appointment was added. Right. So I'm going to do Boolean added. I'm not going to initialize it. If this is true, we're going to say added. Oh, added equals true. Okay. Second thing. Otherwise, if there are no, so otherwise if. In other words, else if. Else, if there are no conflicting appointments, adds appointment to this daily schedule. Okay, so to find out if there are no conflicting appointments, this goes back to the question Charlie asked earlier. We need to really look at all the appointments. Okay, so we're going to say if, actually before this, we're just going to go one by one through the list of appointments. And because we're not adding or removing everything, you just go one by one with the normal for loop. You could also use a for each loop. Okay. So we're going to go one by one. We're saying if appointment.conflict with apt list get I. So if there are no conflicting appointments, add appointment to this daily schedule. In this condition, we're going through one by one. We're looking for conflict. So if there is a conflict, we return false. So we can already here, instead of changing our added value, we can just return false if this is ever true. And then we can kind of make your code more efficient as well. Okay. Finally, right? So we compared this appointment to all the other appointments. We checked it for the emergency. If it doesn't, so if we got to this point of code, it means it's not an emergency and it doesn't conflict with anything. So we could just add the appointment. So app list dot add the appointment. And then we can return group. Okay. Now, something you may or may not have noticed in your quick reference sheet, again, doesn't matter, but it's cool to go over. If we look at the area list add, we actually return true when we add something. So I can make this code even shorter and just, yeah, we just do this, Control X, and I'm gonna put it here. So it's gonna add, and then I'm gonna get true back. So I could do the same thing here. I'm gonna add, and I'm gonna do here, okay? But in this case, notice that I'm kind of adding twice. I'm adding on this condition, and this is outside of the if else. Oh, this is, sorry, this is in the else, and this is in the if. But either way, right, we're adding. Makes sense? So I could just say, take this outside of the else loop, and I can remove this piece of code. Okay, because both in the if and else loop, I'm adding the appointment. There's no point in doing that twice. And I am making sure that I don't add it unnecessarily because my return, one second, let me fix this. Because my return false here, we'll make sure that we exit this code before we ever reach that line if there is a conflict. Okay? So this question, you know, while the part B was really logic to make sure that you know how to loop and remove through an error list, this one was really taking this comment, okay, and just making it into an if else, right? Because everything you needed was in there. And you know, this is it's not just an annoying exam question. This is a very important skill, right? We want to be able to translate from English to code, and before we even translate to English, we want to translate a problem to English. Okay, so whenever you deal in real life with the problem or get a harder problem, you're going to try and translate it to this kind of simpler English form where it clearly says if something, do something, otherwise, so else, oh sorry, else, do another if, do something, and so on. So translate it to simple English and then simple code. Questions? No questions. So